So let's talk about biosimilars. So there's a lot of conversations going on right now in the community about biosimilars. A lot of it is around patients being forced to switch from their reference product. So let's say like a Humira to the Humira biosimilar. And there are a lot of people who are worried and stressed, and rightly so. Like I get it, but I think the conversations that we are having are not really towards people who may have never been on a biologic and are going straight to the biosimilar, or maybe have been on one reference product of a drug. So maybe you've been on Remicade and you're going switching to a Humira biosimilar. So I want to talk about it. I'm afraid that some of the conversations that we are having around biosimilars and people being forced to switch could potentially be causing patients who've never been on a biologic at all scared to go on a biosimilar. And I'll say this right now, I do not agree with forced switching. I'll talk about this in a little bit, but I don't agree with it. I think that it causes too much stress, and I just don't agree with it. So I hope today that we can talk about biosimilars. Let's talk about some of the data. Let's talk about what's going on kind of in our community and what this means for patients, and hopefully it eases some fears. It may not. I know there's a lot of anger, and I get that. I completely understand that, but I want to at least talk about it, and let's talk about what's happening. So everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm Aaron. I am excited today to kind of talk about biosimilars. As you know, I live with Crohn's disease. I'm on a biologic, and I've posted videos about biosimilars already. I was on a biosimilar last year, and things have changed a little bit, right? And that's to be expected. As of last year in 2023, there were, I think, 8 or 9 Humira biosimilars that were approved here in the United States. And this was to be expected as we got further into this year, that there'd be a lot of changes. There'd be a lot of patients who were being forced to switch. And even as we continue through 2024, there will be even more of that as policies change and the world around biosimilars really comes into view. So let's talk about it, right? Let's take a deep dive. Let's do a little more into it, and I'm excited to share kind of what I've learned and read, and talk about what's going on with the community, and try to sympathize, and let's talk about it, okay? So as I said earlier, I don't agree with force switching. Period. Just full stop, right? Force switching, if you don't know, is when your insurance company forces you to go off of your reference product, so say like Humira, and onto the biosimilar for no reason. The only reason is really cost. As we know, biosimilars are much cheaper than the reference product. And so because of that, of course, your insurance wants you to go on the cheaper drug. And I just don't agree with it. I mean, there are patients like me, and a lot of patients I know have been on the same biologic, the reference product, for 10 or more years. We're in good places. We're in remission. You know, these drugs have given us our life back. And we know that switching can be finicky, and starting a different kind of med and all of this could potentially lead us back to that bad place that we were in, right? And I just don't agree with it. It causes a lot of stress, and it's not okay. It's not fair, right? It's just not fair at all. So I don't agree with it. Unfortunately, it's a world that we live in right now. It's going to continue to happen, and what I advocate for in the realm of biosimilars is that patients who have been on a reference product, say like a Humira or a Remicade, already, that they get grandfathered in, that they don't have to switch to the biosimilar, that there is some grace given to these patients, and maybe there are patients who have been on the reference product for a long time and are okay with going on the biosimilar, and they switch, right? But if they don't want to, don't force them to do it. Nobody likes to be forced to do something for anything, but especially when it's related to our health. And so don't do it. I think that there should be some common sense policies and compassion during all of this, because it's stressful on patients, and stress even leads to flares. Stress makes things much worse. So I don't agree with it, and I hope that eventually we come to a kind of a consensus on what to do in this regard. But as of now, there are a lot of patients who are being forced to switch, and I don't like it. I hate seeing the posts about it. I hate it for people. As I've talked about before, I was actually on a biosimilar. So last year, about September of last year, 2023, my insurance pharmacy called and said, "Hey, look, the insurance is preferring the biosimilar over the biologic. We need to get, here where I live, you have to kind of get approval from the doctor, and then talk to the patient and make sure they're okay with it. And if both are okay, then you go to the biosimilar, right?" So it wasn't completely at the time like a forced switch. It was this is our preferred, what we want you to do. Your doctor's okay with it. We want to put you on it. What's your thoughts, etc. And for me, I was one of the patients who I had a little bit concerned. I'd been on at the time Humira for 8 years, I believe. And so I had a little concern, right? I mean, the science and the data, which we will talk about, is there to support switching from the reference product to the biosimilar, and everything's okay. And I talked to a couple of other physician friends of mine who are very familiar with biosimilars and my own doctor, and they agreed that they think it's fine. I mean, based on the science and the data, they're okay with it. So I agreed, right? I made the decision to go ahead and accept the biosimilar. I didn't want to fight it because it would have, there's an approval process that would have had to go back in place to get back on the Humira, and it was just a whole thing. And I was due for my medication. I was like, let's move forward with it. I've talked to a lot of people. I'm okay with it. And I was on that for about 6 months or so, and then my insurance changed because of work. And my current insurance has not implemented biosimilars, so I actually went from the process was I went from the reference product to the biosimilar, and then I went back from the biosimilar to the reference product. And I'm sure at some point this year or next year, I will be forced back to go back on the biosimilar. The good news is that the only reason I had to switch is because of insurance. The biosimilar worked just as well. I didn't experience any flares. My levels, the Humira levels, the adalimumab levels in my body stayed good, stayed within the range that we wanted to be in. And I even had them checked for antibodies before and like in the middle of being on the biosimilar. And then when I went back from the biosimilar to Humira, I had antibodies checked again. I have no antibodies or anything like that. And so it was a smooth transition. I didn't experience anything. The injection was very similar. It didn't hurt or anything like that. So for me, the process was fine. I mean, yes, I did 6 months, but I mean, 6 months, in my opinion, is a good time. It that's a good period to have, say, the reference product out of my system, and to be on a different drug and to kind of know whether or not something had changed. And thankfully, nothing changed. And so I'm grateful for that. And that kind of helped me personally if I have to go back on a biosimilar, because of my experience going from the biologic to the biosimilar to go back, does make me feel better about it. But I will say there was some questions and kind of some concerns. I was nervous, I'm not gonna lie. That's just the truth. But I did it and made the decision, and it worked out. Now, let's talk about what we know about biosimilars, okay? And kind of the conversation that I want to have is really there are patients out there, right, who may have never been on a biologic. They may have never needed a biologic, and now they need one. They may have never had access to it, whether it's insurance or finances or all kinds of things that go into not being able to have access to a medication. Okay, usually I will say a lot of it's financially, a lot of it's insurance not covering it. So finance is a huge thing, and so now that biosimilars are here, right, they're a lot cheaper. There are a lot more insurances that'll cover them because they are significantly cheaper, and so this gives access to patients who may have never had access to these drugs. And I think that is huge. Okay. So having access to a drug is amazing, right? Having access to something you may have never had access to before is really incredible, and it's a wonderful thing. And that is what biosimilars are going to give us, right? They are going to give patients access to drugs they've never had access to before. But like I said earlier, my concern is that there are patients out there who've never been on a biologic or biosimilar and are seeing a lot of these conversations that we're having. And don't get me wrong here. If you are being forced to switch, obviously you don't need my approval. But I don't want people to think that I am saying don't talk about it. Don't talk about your experience. Don't do that. That's not what I'm saying, right? I think it's hugely important because talking about stuff like this is one of the ways that we're going to get, hopefully, fingers crossed, recognition by people who can make change to make sure that force switching is not something that happens to people, right? Sharing our experiences are huge. And I think everybody should share. And let's talk about it and share your experience of being force switched, share the concerns, the emotions, everything that goes in, because it's a huge process. Like it's a big ordeal. So I don't want people to think that I'm saying don't share about it because you're going to scare people. That's definitely not it. But I do think that there needs to be more conversation around the safety and efficacy of biosimilars, what it means for patients who have never been on a biologic or never been on the reference product, and how that may affect them, and what we know about biosimilars, because I think it's important. Because there are gonna be a lot more patients now who are going on these biosimilars who are either being forced to switch or have never been on a biologic and are going on a biosimilar. And especially as a newly diagnosed patient, if you see somebody very scared and upset about going to a certain drug, that makes you kind of step back, right? It makes you, be like, oh, maybe this is, even more scary than I was initially, right? And so I think it's just kind of important to kind of frame these conversations in a way that ensures that our concerns are there, they're being voiced, people see, but also that patients who are not quite there or going on a biosimilar for the first time aren't necessarily overly scared. We all know that starting any new medication is scary. Whether or not you've been on a medication before, you're new to a drug, it is scary to start a new medication, period. Whether that's a reference biologic, whether that's a pill, whether that's a biosimilar, it is scary because we don't know how our body's going to react to it, right? And so I just don't want to have more undue stress or more people scared than they need to be who are going into this, what we call either bio naive, meaning they've never been on a biologic, or say bio naive to that specific biologic. So let's talk a little bit about biosimilars, okay? So biosimilars, they're not they're not a generic, right? They are not identical copies of the original drug. So, for instance, we know what a generic is. Like you get prescribed some drug like Finnergan or something, and you go pick it up and it says promethazine. It's the same thing. It's just a generic, right? It's different. It's just basically an identical copy of that drug. Okay. Biosimilars are not that way. Biologic drugs are completely different. The way that they're made, you cannot make an identical copy of that drug and make it a biosimilar. That's just not how it works. They're not identical copies, so they're not generics. We can think of it that way in a sense because that's going to help a lot of us grasp that concept of, okay, it's kind of a generic, it's similar to that drug, etc. But let's be clear. I think that it's important to know that these are not actually generics. They're not identical copies. They're a little bit different, and so they're called a biosimilar. They're very similar to the original product, but they are not the same. Okay. So the thing about biosimilars is that when they are developed and created, they involve conducting studies that compare these biosimilars to the reference product for similarity. That's also why they're called biosimilars. They're not looking at basically their own efficacy. They're really comparing their efficacy to the reference product. How similar are they? How well does this work to the reference product? And so that's the first part. They're not generics. We can kind of think of it that way, and you will hear some people call it a generic. And again, it's just an easier way to understand, to grasp a little bit of the concept, and that's okay. I'm not like I'm like, oh, it's not a generic, it's not a generic. It's not, right? But if that helps people understand what we were talking about, so be it. But let's just kind of realize that it's not a true generic. It's not an identical copy just because of how these drugs are made and how they are, how they're biologics. It's just how they're made, and they just can't be identical copies. It's just how it is. So biosimilars, like I said, they're going to allow greater patient access to these drugs. And a lot of that is because of price, right? It stimulates what we call market competition. So this drives down prices. This makes it to where, there are more drugs that are cheaper. That's competitive. Competitiveness in the drug market is something that helps drive down prices, drives down costs, also helps with access. It's a huge thing. And it also is going to help with some healthcare sustainability. That is because of the cost, the cheaper cost of it. I will say, so my biologic and biosimilar that I was on from like my insurance, my biologic, the reference product, the insurance was paying close to $7,000 a month. When I went to the biosimilar, insurance paid about $1,000 a month. It was a $6,000 difference, and that's a big deal. That's $60,000 to $70,000 versus $12,000 to $13,000. It's a big difference, right? But a few important things about biosimilars is that they maintain very high standards of quality, safety, and efficacy compared to that reference product, meaning that the quality, the safety, how well they work are very similar and have no really meaningful differences from the reference product, meaning they work just as well. They're just as safe, and the way that they are created and produced are of the same quality, and that's huge. That's important. And not only that, they boast these comparable levels of safety, quality, and effectiveness, and that's kind of the same thing as I just said, but just meaning that they are very comparable to the reference product when it comes to safety and effectiveness, and that is a big deal because you want to make sure that if you're going on a biosimilar that to a product, that it's just as good, right? That it works just as well. There's just as safe. The quality of the medication is just as good, and that it's effective, that it works just as well as the other. And they go through rigorous processes, right? I mean, it's not just like, oh, we have a biosimilar, let's approve it. No, 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 no. They go through step-by-step processes. They go through clinical trials, all of that, and that's how we know these trials and stuff are how we know how well they are, how well they do, and the way that they work compared to the reference product. And one other thing is that I think here in the United States, biosimilars are new, right? Last year, especially for like Humira, there were 8 or 9 approved, as I said earlier. But they are not new to the world. The first biosimilar was approved in Europe in 2006. I think the first Humira or adalimumab biosimilar was 2017. And so we have a lot of data on biosimilars, right? They've been around for a really, really long time. And there's this misconception that they're new, they're a new drug, we have no data, etc. In my mind, it's similar to I reference Humira a lot. It's just what I know. Let's say like Humira, right? When Humira was the first approved for Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, it's like, oh, it's new, it's new. It's actually been around a really long time. These drugs were approved for like psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis like years before we got an approval for Crohn's and UC. So we have tons of data on these drugs, like just like that, like biosimilars. We have a ton of data to know that they are safe and effective. And yes, more companies may be creating biosimilars, and those specific ones may not have been around, but most of them have been around for quite a long time. And so what that tells me is that we have a lot of data to know that to support that these drugs are safe and effective and are made with very high quality. They're very similar to the reference product. And there's something I read the other day just said that biosimilars to be approved, they have no clinically meaningful differences compared to the reference product, and clinically meaningful differences such as safety and efficacy and all the symptom management, all of that. So there is also data on switching, right? There's data on switching from the reference product to the biosimilar, and the data also supports that switching is fine. It doesn't affect the efficacy of the drug, doesn't affect like antibodies or anything like that, that it's a pretty seamless transition, right? And even knowing that, right, even saying that still doesn't help people who are being forced to switch, right? And so, and that's just because, and even me, right, even myself, it's scary. We were in such a bad place when we were first diagnosed and untreated that not wanting to go back to that, not wanting to take a single chance of going back to that is deep and emotional and overwhelming thinking about it, because we know that any little change to anything and what we do, maybe let's say we ate something we shouldn't, right? Some of us have diet triggers, or maybe we did something we know that may give us a flare, right? We understand that going back to that bad of a place is just not an option, and that any little change in routine or medication or stress levels can potentially trigger a flare and send us back that way. And so switching from a reference product to a biosimilar with the data that supports the switching, it's still a change, right? It's still a similar medication. It's not the exact same. It is similar. And so knowing that, it's hard. We do not want to go back to that place that we were at when we were at our sickest before these treatments that we were on. And I understand that, and I am with you. And I was very sick when I was first diagnosed, like most of us, very sick, very ill in the hospital, very skinny. It took a while to get into a good place, to get into remission. And I don't want to change anything that I don't have to. That's going to potentially put me in a different spot. And so I completely understand. I mean, the data is there to support the switching, but the stress and everything that it can cause, and knowing that we are changing something slightly, and the slightest change could send us to potentially a flare. I mean, that's important, and that's something that I hope that is considered as we move into this world of biosimilars. And so, but again, the data is there, and I hope that if you're being forced to switch, that you can at least have a little bit of ease or calmness come over you, knowing that we have tons of data to support that switching is typically seamless and that there is no differences, clinically meaningful differences in the biosimilar versus the biologic. And my fingers are crossed for those who are forced to switch. Again, my own personal experience with switching was fine. There was really no difference. I was monitored. We're all monitored closely. I was monitored closely at blood work and antibody tests, like I said, and all of that. And I was good, right? And I still am. To be fair, I've had a little bump in the road, but it has nothing to do with me being on a biosimilar. I've got a few things going on that we're trying to figure out, and it may or may not be Crohn's disease acting up, but overall, I'm still in a good place. Even being on Humira for a very long time, I always had a little bit of bumps here and there. I had small flares. Even 2 years ago, I had a little bit of a flare and kind of came out of it quickly. And even before I switched to the biosimilar, about several months before, I had another little bit of a flare and came out of it quickly. So I have bumps in the road. I think a lot of us do, but my experience was really good on the biosimilar, and for me, that helps a lot. But it's not, force switching is not fair. But I also think that it's not fair to not talk about the other side of this, right? Like I said, the patients who are bio naive, never been on a biologic, or are naive to that specific biologic. I don't think it's fair to not have a conversation around that and know that biosimilars are overall a really good thing. That, again, one of the biggest things for me is the access to care. I believe every patient should have access to the care that they need at any time that they need it. Just full stop, irregardless of anything. I think that if you need a drug, you should have access to it. Nothing should be in your way of getting that drug that you need to get better. And so access is important, and biosimilars are going to provide that, right? I mean, there are going to be patients who have never been able to get on a biologic that will now be able to and not have to pay anything or maybe a couple bucks. And so that's a great thing. And to know that even overall, this could help, like I said, healthcare sustainability. That's huge in the United States. There's a lot of healthcare expenditure, and if we can help drive that cost down even a little bit, it's really good. That's good for everybody. So I want to finish out with just saying, I hope that wherever you're at in your journey with the biologic and the biosimilar, if you're being forced to switch, first off, I am sorry. I know that is stressful. I know that it is scary, and I know that it is not fair. Please continue to share your story about the force switching, so hopefully we can come together as a community and as a healthcare industry and get some policy out there, do something to where force switching is not a thing, and there are things in place, there are processes in place to help patients be grandfathered in and to not have to switch. And that's what I hope that we continue to do, and we get to that point, right? And then the other thing is that you've never been on a biologic and your doctor's like, we're going to put you on one, it's time. We're going to put you on the biosimilar. This is what it is. They may tell you about the reference product, they may not. But I hope that you understand that obviously starting a medication is scary. Any new medication, especially an injection or infusion, is just extra scary. But know that the biosimilars that we currently have available to us have gone through very rigorous processes. They've gone through clinical trials, and there are no clinically meaningful differences between that biosimilar and the reference product. So if you're first starting out, it's a great option. It can be a great option for you. You shouldn't really know any difference than whether or not you started the biosimilar or the reference product, right? That's what the data tells us. And so I hope that also if you're in that spot where you're going on a biosimilar a biologic for the first time and it's a biosimilar, I would love to hear your story. I would love to see you share about that and talk about that, because it's something that sharing our stories about this stuff is what's going to help patients. And so having somebody in that situation and talking about it, I think is fantastic. I think it needs to be talked about. And so I hope that no matter where you are in this process, that you get the medication that you need, that whatever experience you're going through, that that the medication works, and that if you're switching, that it's a seamless switch, and you continue to stay in remission and in a great spot. And I hope that if you're starting the biosimilar, that you have a great experience as well, that you get into remission and get to the spot that you need to be in so that you can live your best healthy life. And I hope that we continue to talk about this. I will continue to talk about it. I've got some more videos I want to talk about. I'll make some update videos, as I said, as we continue through 2024 and even into 2025. It's going to be a lot of changes and a lot of things happen related to biosimilars. There's going to be more people switching. There's going to be more that come out. Probably, I'm sure at the beginning of next year, there'll be a lot of insurance changes when everything resets about biosimilars. So we'll continue to talk about it. We'll raise our voices and we will keep talking about it. And I hope that this helps somebody, somebody who's in one of these situations where we are feeling a little better about it, maybe, maybe not, but I hope that this helps in some way. So thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming to my channel. I hope that this was helpful in some way. I hope that you'll like and subscribe and all that. And I hope that this helps you and maybe share it with somebody who's maybe going through a situation. So thank you so much. Again, like and subscribe, and I'll see you at the next video.